15 distinct housing types that once defined British streets have essentially vanished from modern construction, taking with them craftsmanship and character that today's builders simply won't touch. The twist that'll surprise you? Many disappeared not because they were poorly built, but because they were built too well. From secret servant quarters to architects who genuinely believed height would liberate working families. But perhaps you still live in one of these first homes. Back-to-back terraces defined working-class Britain during the Industrial Revolution. These were houses literally built against each other, sharing rear walls with no back doors or yards. Peak construction ran from 1800 to 1900, housing millions in industrial cities like Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester, and Bradford. These weren't quaint cottages. They were industrial housing designed to cram maximum workers near factories at minimum cost. The construction was ruthlessly efficient. Each house followed a 2-up, 2-down layout. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 bedrooms upstairs, with shared outdoor privies. The front door opened directly onto the street, whilst the back of your house was literally someone else's house behind you. There was no rear access, no gardens, no ventilation. The sheer audacity of packing humans this densely is remarkable. Builders maximised their land use whilst workers got affordable housing near employment. The density created tight-knit communities where you couldn't avoid each other. The problems were catastrophic. With no through ventilation, tuberculosis spread rapidly through these confined spaces. The shared outdoor privies became disease vectors. The Public Health Act 1875 and Housing Act 1909 effectively banned new construction. Most were demolished between the 1930s and 1970s. Building new ones? Completely illegal. Modern regulations require minimum space standards and proper ventilation. But what about the other end of the spectrum? What do those from across the pond think of when they picture British housing? Here's something that is a little more picturesque. Traditional British stone cottages defined rural Britain for centuries, built from locally available stone, whether Cotswold limestone, Yorkshire gritstone, or Welsh slate. These weren't whimsical fantasies, they were working agricultural housing built by skilled stonemasons using techniques passed down through generations. Proper traditional stone cottages built with authentic construction methods are essentially extinct as new builds. The construction was a regional craft. Walls were built from locally quarried stone, typically 18 to 24 inches thick for structural strength. There were no cavity walls or damp-proof courses, just solid stone bonded with lime mortar. Roofs were covered with heavy stone slates requiring massive timber frames. Windows were kept small because glass was expensive and large openings weakened structural integrity. The genius lay in their honest use of materials. Those thick stone walls provided excellent thermal mass. The lime mortar allowed walls to breathe naturally. The stone itself was incredibly durable. 500-year-old cottages still stand solid today. Economics and regulations eventually killed them off. Skilled stonemasons are now rare and expensive at £250 to £350 per day. Quarrying local stone is often illegal. Those solid stone walls don't meet modern insulation standards. Today, genuine stone cottages in the Cotswolds, Yorkshire Dales or Lake District fetch over £1 million. New stone cottages are occasionally built as luxury homes, but they're essentially modern brick houses with stone cladding. Not authentic load-bearing construction. The Edwardians looked at all the previous Victorian darkness and said, absolutely not. And what they built next changed British housing forever. Edwardian houses represented a deliberate rejection of Victorian gloom. Built between 1901 and 1914, these homes featured wider windows and lighter interiors. They combined Victorian build quality with more modern layouts that acknowledged kitchens shouldn't be dungeon-like basements. The typical Edwardian semi had distinctive features: red tile paths, stained glass panels, picture rails, and that particular Edwardian green paint on woodwork. Rooms were noticeably larger than Victorian equivalents, with windows designed to let in natural light. You'd find built-in dressers, tiled fireplaces with Art Nouveau influences, and proper indoor bathrooms. Service features were scaled down but present. A pantry off the kitchen, scullery for washing, sometimes a maid's room in the attic, and coal bunkers replacing street coal holes. The class structure was mellowing into something more practical. The optimism built into these houses is still palpable. This was an era that believed in progress and better living conditions. These houses showcase some of the last genuine craftsmanship before mass production. Handmade stained glass, tile work from Minton or Dalton, skilled joinery. Upkeep became the Achilles heel. Large Edwardian houses became white elephants after World War II. Too big without servants, too expensive to heat. The 1950s and 60s saw brutal conversions into flats. Today they're hugely desirable but rarely built new. Prices in West London or Cambridge hit £1.5 million, but regulations mean you can't legally build those uninsulated single-skin walls anymore. But centuries before Victorian servants and Edwardian sunshine, there was a housing style so iconic that Britons kept faking it for 400 years after it went out of fashion. Authentic Tudor buildings date from 1485 to 1603 using construction methods that seem completely mental by modern standards. These were timber-framed structures with wattle and daub infill panels and jettied upper floors. The construction involved oak frames joined with mortise and tenon joints held by wooden pegs. The infill panels were woven hazel daubed with clay, animal dung, straw, and animal hair. Yes, you lived in a house partly made of shit, but it worked. Those jettied floors gave more space upstairs where land was expensive. Tudor revival swept Britain from the 1860s onwards, keeping the aesthetic whilst ditching authentic construction. You'd have brick structure with applied timber framing that was purely decorative. The Victorians built thousands in suburbs wanting the old England charm without medieval inconvenience. The style peaked in the 1920s and 30s with stockbroker Tudor semis, fake beams, decorative gables, diamond-paned windows on modern brick construction. Problems with authentic Tudor were legion. Wattle and daub rots when wet, timber gets woodworms, structures settle alarmingly, and they're impossible to insulate to modern standards. Fire risk was tremendous. Maintenance was endless. Today, maintaining either original Tudor or revival is eye-wateringly expensive. Original Tudor requires specialist craftspeople charging £60 to £80 per hour, with surveys often revealing £100,000 of necessary work. Building new Tudor revival? The style is so associated with 1930s suburbia, it's deeply unfashionable. We've been cosplaying Tudor for 400 years, whilst actual construction methods went extinct in the 1600s. While Tudor builders were slapping together wonky timber frames filled with literal dung, Georgian architects were doing mathematics to achieve perfection, and you can still see the difference. Georgian architecture dominated British building from 1714 to 1830, giving us elegant urban housing like Bath's stone terraces, London squares, and Edinburgh's new town. This was architecture built on symmetry, classical proportions based on mathematical ratios, and perfectly aligned sash windows. True Georgian townhouses aren't being built anymore because the materials, craftsmanship, and economic model have vanished. A proper Georgian townhouse followed strict architectural rules. The facade had to be absolutely symmetrical. If you had a window on one side, you needed a matching one opposite, even if fake. Proportions followed classical orders with the piano nobile featuring the tallest ceilings and grandest windows. Inside you'd find timber floorboards, elegant panelled doors and fireplaces in every room. The intellectual rigour was extraordinary. These weren't arbitrary designs, they were based on classical proportions from ancient Rome and Greece, adapted for British conditions. Builders used pattern books showing exactly how to achieve proper proportions. Construction quality was superb, with lime mortar letting walls breathe and proper timber joinery lasting centuries. Problems came from changing lifestyles. Basement kitchens are unsuitable by modern standards. Room layouts assumed coal fires, so sealing fireplaces without understanding ventilation causes damp. Single glazed sash windows are thermally terrible, and long, narrow floor plans create dark middle rooms. Today, Georgian townhouses in Bath, Edinburgh, or London's Bloomsbury command millions. Building new? It's hideously expensive, and regulations require insulation standards that Georgian proportions don't accommodate. Georgian perfection was brilliant, but by the 1860s, rebels decided mass production was destroying souls, and started building houses as a middle finger to industrialisation. The arts and crafts movement kicked off in the 1860s as deliberate industrial revolution rejection. William Morris and contemporaries decided mass production was destroying craftsmanship and souls. Arts and crafts houses became architectural manifestations, handmade, brutally honest about materials, deliberately medieval and absolutely beautiful. The typical house telegraphed philosophy instantly. Exposed structural timbers actually doing work, not fakery. Brickwork left exposed with lime mortar showing the craftsman's skill. Windows were leaded casements with irregular panes, handmade locally. Roof tiles were hand-cut, varying in size and colour. Metalwork was hand-forged with decorative elements from nature. Architects like Voysey, Lutyens and Bailey Scott created masterpieces between 1880 and 1920. Standon in Sussex demonstrates arts and crafts perfectly. Local sandstone and brick, handmade tiles, massive inglenooks. Problems were threefold: cost, practicality and contradiction. Handcrafted everything meant expensive when new and expensive to maintain. Hand-forged metalwork requires specialist blacksmiths. Handmade windows leak and distort. Many lacked proper plumbing or heating. Most tellingly, wealthy clients commissioned expensive houses whilst architects preach simplicity. Today, original arts and crafts houses are collector's items fetching £2 to £3 million and beyond. Building new at scale? Essentially impossible. The entire point was rejecting mass production, which is exactly what modern building relies upon. Those handcrafted arts and crafts houses were beautiful, but punishingly expensive. Then modern Britain did the opposite. Building by the millions was something far more affordable and far more controversial. The interwar semi defined British suburbia between 1918 and 1939, roughly 4 million built. These houses birthed modern suburban Britain, spreading along arterial roads and tube lines, promising every family their own garden and indoor plumbing. Your typical 1930s semi had about 900 to 1,000 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, proper bathroom, separate parlour and living room and back garden. The exterior featured bay windows with stained glass sunbursts, pebbledash upper floors and tile-hung gables. These were designed for the emerging lower middle class, clerks, tradesmen, teachers, who could afford £500 to £600 mortgages. Construction was solid but downgraded from Victorian. 9-inch solid brick walls with render or pebbledash. Metal crittle windows rather than timber sashes, cheaper and more modern. Mass-produced tiled fireplaces with Art Deco styling. This was a genuine social revolution. For the first time, ordinary families could own homes with bathrooms, gardens, and separate spaces. The Dun-Roman culture emerged, intensely private and domesticity-focused. Time revealed their flaws. Pebbledash ages badly. Single-glazed metal windows condensate and rust. Solid walls have no insulation. Many contain asbestos. Small rooms feel cramped. Today, interwar semis remain Britain's most common suburban housing, typically £300,000 to £600,000. Building new, never happening. The 1930s semi was meant to last forever. So what happened after World War II? Although Britain desperately built temporary homes designed for 10 years, some lasted 70. Postwar prefabs represented desperate pragmatism. Between 1945 and 1951, Britain built 156,622 prefabs designed to last just 10 years. Some lasted 70. The Archon, Uniseco and BISF prefabs were factory-made, trucked to sites and assembled in days. Construction was ingenious desperation. Steel or timber frames supported asbestos cement or corrugated steel walls with flat roofs. Each came complete with revolutionary luxuries for 1945. Fitted kitchen with refrigerator, built-in wardrobes, indoor bathroom. About 600 square feet with 2 bedrooms. The social impact was profound. Families moved from condemned back-to-backs into prefabs with bathrooms, hot water and proper kitchens. Many loved them. Compact but modern, with communal estates creating strong communities. The floors were entirely predictable. Not built for longevity. Asbestos required expensive removal. Flat roofs leaked constantly. Steel frames corroded. Zero insulation meant astronomical heating costs. By the 1970s, most councils wanted them gone, though residents often fought demolition. Today, perhaps 2,000 survive, protected by tenacious occupants and English heritage. Building new? Materials are now illegal and the economic model doesn't work. Those prefabs were temporary, whereas the next solution was permanent, until a woman lit a match for morning tea and brought down a 22-story tower's entire corner. Between 1945 and 1979, Britain built approximately 400,000 flats in high-rise towers using system building, factory-produced solutions to housing shortages. These concrete monoliths became bywords for social failure, with many demolished within 30 years. System building used prefabricated concrete panels assembled on site. The notorious large panel system included Larsen-Nielsen. When Ronan Point suffered gas explosion causing partial collapse in 1968, killing 4, it exposed fundamental flaws. Panels were held together with minimal fixings, meaning progressive collapse. One panel failing could bring down entire sections. Initially, architects believed towers would liberate families from slums, providing streets in the sky. Local authorities loved them for maximising units on expensive land. Central governments subsidised high-rise generously. Problems were devastating. Lifts constantly broke. Access decks became dangerous. Flats were poorly designed with tiny rooms. Heating costs were astronomical. Condensation was endemic. Construction defects ranged from annoying to catastrophic. Concrete cancer spread as water penetrated reinforcing steel. Today, surviving towers required massive investment. The 2017 Grenfell fire killing 72 demonstrated refurbishment risks. System-built towers were concrete nightmares, but Britain's oldest roofing tradition, dating back to the Bronze Age, created chocolate box cottages, until insurance companies and fire risk killed the dream. Thatched roofs represent Britain's oldest roofing tradition, dating to the Bronze Age. Roughly 20,000 thatched properties survive. While some new-build thatched properties are constructed, perhaps 100 to 200 yearly, traditional methods and economic models have vanished. Modern thatched properties are luxury lifestyle choices. Traditional thatching used water reed, wheat straw, or local reeds layered and fixed to timber frames. Good water reed lasted 50 to 60 years, wheat straw 20 to 25 years. Thickness was 12 to 15 inches, creating excellent insulation. Roofs had to be steep, at least 50 degrees pitch. The ecological sense was perfect. Local renewable materials, minimal processing, harvestable without industrial infrastructure. Thatch breathes, allowing moisture escape whilst keeping rain out. Problems are substantial. Fire risk is obvious. Insurance costs £2,000 to £5,000 annually, sometimes with £10,000 plus excess. Maintenance is constant. Full rethatch costs £15,000 to £30,000 every 20 to 30 years. Vermin love thatch. Specialised skills are dying. Perhaps only 800 to 1,000 professional thatchers remain. Planning authorities now restrict new thatched properties due to fire risk. Modern timber frames aren't suitable. The economic model collapsed when thatchers charge £200 plus per day. Thatching becomes luxury. Thatch roofs were expensive luxury until millions of British houses got covered in something far cheaper that everyone now absolutely despises, despite it being brilliant when first applied. Rendering pebbledash, that pebbly finish covering millions of British houses, represents democratisation of rendered facades. Between 1920 and 1960, pebbledash covered everything from interwar semis to council houses at a fraction of facing brick's cost. Today, new application is virtually extinct, its reputation gone from practical to aesthetic disaster. The technique was brilliantly simple. Apply base coat of render and whilst wet, dash small pebbles onto it. Pebbles embedded partially, creating textured weatherproof surface. Pure economics made pebbledash successful. Facing bricks cost twice as much as common bricks plus pebbledash. For builders creating affordable housing, the difference was crucial. Pebbledash disguised imperfections, handled British climate well, and required virtually no maintenance. The decline was gradual but inevitable. Cement-based renders don't breathe, trapping moisture. Poor application meant pebbles fell off or render cracked. Pollution stained pebbledash with black streaks and green algae. Rough texture trapped dirt impossibly. By the 1970s, it acquired reputation as cheap and working class. The perception shift was brutal. Properties were devalued. Stripping pebbledash became cottage industry at £30 to £60 per square metre. Today, new pebbledash is dead. Pebbledash was just external coating. The next one fails for a darker reason. Concrete columns reinforced with recycled military truck tubing that eventually split houses in two. Airey houses represent post-war Britain's attempt at industrialised construction. Built between 1945 and 1955, roughly 26,000 appeared in mining areas and industrial towns. Designed by Sir Edwin Airey, using reinforced concrete columns with precast panels, the system promised speed, economy and durability. It delivered the first two, Durability went spectacularly wrong. Construction was innovative for its time. 4 reinforced concrete columns marked corners with additional columns forming structural frame. Precast panels slotted between creating walls. External finish was usually render. Roof was conventional timber with tiles. The appeal was speed under crisis. Airey houses went up in weeks when bricklayers were scarce and materials rationed. They could be built by less skilled labour. Problems emerged in the 1980s, catastrophic by the 1990s. Concrete column steel reinforcement was corroding, compromising integrity. Water penetration allowed chlorides to attack steel. The Building Research Establishment declared many unmortgageable in 1984, destroying values overnight and trapping owners. Government launched repair programs. Some were demolished, many underwent complete reconstruction, entire external envelope replaced with brick. This cost £40,000 to £60,000 per property. You'll find most are now either demolished or renovated. Airey built 26,000 problem houses. Wimpey built 300,000 using concrete with a clever twist. They removed all the sand, which seemed brilliant until it wasn't. Wimpey no-fines were another post-war system, built 1945 to 1955, approximately 300,000 constructed. The name refers to concrete mix. No fines means concrete without fine sand, using only large aggregate. This created porous concrete that was lighter and easier to cast. Construction was distinctly different. Instead of bricks, cast concrete walls, typically 8 inches thick. Concrete was mixed on site and poured into timber formwork. Walls were rendered externally and plastered internally. You could cast entire streets quickly without skilled bricklayers. The innovation lay in the no-fines concrete itself. Large aggregate mix was easier to work with and didn't shrink during curing. Wimpey could industrialise the process. Houses were decent, typically 900 to 1,000 square feet with 3 bedrooms. The flaws became apparent over time. No-fines concrete was weaker than conventional, limiting alterations. Porous nature allowed water penetration. Carbonation affected it faster. The mortgage crisis hit hard in the 1980s and 90s. Lenders became nervous and many properties were declared unmortgageable. This crashed values. Some underwent overcladding, others were demolished. Most are often unrecognised due to the render that disguises them. Wimpey's concrete was porous by design, but architects thought they could do better. Build streets in the sky where neighbours would chat on raised concrete walkways. What could go wrong? Deck access estates represented architectural modernism's most ambitious attempt to reimagine urban housing by creating streets in the sky. Raised walkways connecting flats designed to replicate traditional street community. Built primarily 1955 to 1975, they became some of Britain's most notorious problem estates, with many demolished within 30 years. The architectural theory was sophisticated. Streets are where community happens, where neighbours meet and children play. By lifting streets into the air, you could achieve density whilst preserving community. Park Hill in Sheffield housed 3,280 people in 995 flats. Construction reflected modernist ideals, concrete frames with raw concrete exposed, béton brut, hence brutalism, and large deck areas. Decks were genuinely street width, initially incorporating shops and laundries. Flats opened onto decks rather than corridors. The architects believed architecture could engineer social outcomes. Problems were comprehensive. Decks became dangerous, isolated, poorly lit, prone to crime. Unlike real streets, there was no through traffic. Flats were poorly designed. Concrete decayed rapidly. The social engineering failed catastrophically. You cannot create community by architectural fiat. Real streets work because they're part of larger urban fabric. Robin Hood Gardens was demolished 2017 to 19. Unfortunately, or perhaps not, new deck access estates aren't being built. Those deck access estates were one disaster flavour, but they were part of a broader movement that gave Britain its most hated buildings, and some now worth £500,000. Brutalism, that love it or hate it movement characterised by raw concrete, dominated British social housing 1955 to 1975. The name comes from béton brut, raw concrete, not brutality. Brutalism gave Britain hundreds of developments: Trellick Tower, Balfron Tower, the Barbican, the Aylesbury Estate. These represented comprehensive philosophy about how working-class people should live. Brutalist housing had distinctive characteristics: raw concrete surfaces deliberately left unfinished, geometric forms creating dramatic silhouettes, bold scale, exposed surfaces as architectural features, and Le Corbusier principles: pilotis raising buildings, roof gardens, pedestrian vehicle separation. Labour governments actively subsidised high-rise construction, paying councils more for taller buildings. Architects like Goldfinger believed they were creating superior housing liberating families from Victorian slums. The vision was genuinely utopian. These weren't cheap barracks but carefully designed buildings. Flats were often generous, many larger than contemporary private housing. Problems were devastating. Concrete weathers terribly. The thermal mass made British housing cold. Condensation was epidemic. Layouts created confusing environments prone to crime. The social failure was profound. Right to Buy from 1980 allowed better-off tenants to leave, accelerating residualisation. Political reaction was savage. Vast demolition programmes launched. Yet ironically, private brutalist developments became extraordinarily desirable. Trellick Tower now has flats selling £500,000 to £600,000. Today, new brutalist social housing is unthinkable. If you enjoyed this architectural tour through Britain's lost housing types, check out our video on 30 genius British home features that have disappeared. From back-to-back slums to brutalist towers, these 15 housing styles disappeared for reasons far more complex than fashion, sometimes through catastrophic failure, sometimes through economic shifts, and sometimes we just lost genuinely brilliant craftsmanship we've never quite matched since.